Skip, I'm going to try this, see if it works. Just kind of give you an overview of endowments for nonprofits. So let's just look at this one website here. Maybe we'll look at another. 5 steps to starting an endowment. Even smaller nonprofits can, which we're small. Step 1, implement an organizational business plan based on responsible financial planning and management. Well, you know, we've been doing our planning, haven't we? And it talks about the leadership of nonprofits a little bit. Step 2, sell your board or donors on the need for an adequate cash reserve fund before addressing an endowment. Before is in italics. So they make the push that you should have cash reserve thinking along the same time that you're having endowment thoughts. And it talks about that a little bit. I'll just try to point out a few things on this website. Donors may well be more in tune with wise financial fundamentals than board members. Unfortunately, many people do not trust some nonprofits to use their donations wisely. By being completely transparent about your finances, you can make sure potential donors don't have any reason to distrust your organization. So they're saying be completely transparent about your finances. That's important to get donors to donate. And then they talk about having reserves and how much it should be, and of course as a startup, you know, I'll forget whether it's this website or a different one, they talk about how much, but as you're just starting up, you just want to have a goal of getting towards that. Typically 12 months is what they like to see, but 3 to 6 months cash reserve is where you're at when you're starting up at the very beginning. And we kind of still in that mode, looks like. Set up both a cash reserve and an endowment fund. And it talks about the 3 types of endowments: permanent, quasi, and term. Permanent is one typically you think of. Quasi is not really an endowment, it's just sort of something that works like an endowment that the board sets up. And term is an endowment that has a time limit on it. But typically you think of endowments as being permanent. Okay. 3 types of endowment: provide financial flexibility as well as stability, and, despite popular misconception, can start with very small amounts of money. That declaration begs the question, how much is, quote, very small amount? And then the answer is very small indeed. The Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, in its financial statement of not-for-profit organizations uses illustrations such as, quote, a donor contributed cash of $70 to create a term endowment, and, quote, a donor contributed cash of $200 to create a permanent endowment fund. As long as a nonprofit sets aside any amount of cash, securities, or other assets as restricted or unrestricted, and I'll talk about that later, net assets, whether donated or not, and accounts for them properly, it has an endowment. So even if you have not yet asked, much less received, donations earmarked for permanent or term endowment, put a portion of your income into a board-designated, aka quasi-endowment, and keep your accountant in the loop, like having a cash reserve showing potential donors that your nonprofit has an endowment of any kind can encourage more donations of all kinds. Finally, if you have a growing cash reserve, which we don't, of course, direct any excess funds from that reserve into your quasi-endowment where the unrestricted assets will remain available for emergencies. What they mean by unrestricted or restricted is the donor can designate whether or not the endowment funds, the funds in the endowment is restricted or unrestricted. Unrestricted means the board can do whatever they, or whoever is managing the endowment with the nonprofit, which typically is a board, can do whatever they want to with the money that comes in from the endowment. But restricted means the donor can say, well, I want whatever the endowment money that you get to go towards something like training or some function of the nonprofit, or like paying the songwriters or something like that. That would be a restricted fund. You're probably better off trying to keep it unrestricted. Step 4, look for investment managers who offer suitable strategies in terms of historical return and risk for the endowment, and perhaps even the cash reserve fund. So you want, this is where you can talk a lot about whether or not you're going to use this community thing that a lot of people use to manage your endowment, or whether you get some other fund managers to manage your endowment. And you would want to pick managers that would be good managers, of course, and so that's something you have to consider on the front end, who's going to manage the endowment. Look for a registered investment advisor, RIA. Defines a RIA as, quote, an advisor or firm engaged in the investment advisory business and registered either with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, or state securities authorities. An RIA has, quote, fiduciary duty to his or her clients, a fundamental obligation to provide suitable investment advice and always act in the client's best interests. And there's 34,000 RIAs across the United States and so forth. So this is something you'll have to, consider as you get into creating an endowment is who you're going to get to manage it. And the registered company is either independent or affiliated with wirehouses, insurance companies, mutual funds. Of this vast RIA universe, a small minority offers established strategic and tactical strategies for accounts as small as $25,000. I know of one that will actively manage accounts as low as $5,000. Advances in trading technology and innovations in the investment products RIAs use, exchange-traded funds, ETFs, have made small accounts cost-effective. So you can set up an endowment with a smaller amount of money than you probably thought possible at first, and then it talks about you can have bank account and so forth. This was, you know, if you got such small amounts that you don't have a RIA registered investment advisor managing it. Step 5, incorporate cash reserve and endowment components into capital campaigns and regular fundraising efforts. Tout those accounts to grant makers. Mark Vincent's 5th question concerns what nonprofits communicate to their donors and grant makers. Does money simply enable your organization to survive? Are you being frugal with what little you have, or do you plan to expand your efforts with the next round of contributions? This question resonates strongly with what this guy, talking about this guy, approach current and potential donors not with a narrative of weakness, but one of growth, strength, and greatness of mission. Negotiate with grant makers as an equal, not a supplicant. Emphasize the good that donors' gifts can support, the positive difference their money can make, not your need for funds. This kind of emphasis, combined with wise money management, enables you to show that a donor's gift, quote, creates more value with you than it would if it were given elsewhere, lingered in their bank account, or was spent on a delicious latte. Your nonprofit can talk to grant makers and donors about, quote, creating something of value, changing lives, and creating impact, thereby making, quote, the world a better, more astonishing place to live. And we have that to offer, you know. Okay, that's the end of that article, and I just thought, you know, it might be a little bit beneficial to go through that. There are other websites that are similar, that have similar talk in them, and I could expand on that, but that gives you a little bit of a background of how you lead into having an endowment and when. You don't have to wait till you have a lot of money. It's evident from reading that.